The glow of Marcus Thompson's computer screen illuminated his cramped apartment in Austin at 2:47 a.m. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he stared at the forum post that would change everything. "Digital currency reaches $100 per coin," the headline read, accompanied by dozens of comments ranging from excitement to skepticism. Marcus had been following Bitcoin since it was worth pennies, watching from the sidelines as early adopters shared stories of massive gains and devastating losses. Tonight felt different. Tonight, the pieces finally clicked into place. Marcus leaned back in his worn desk chair, his mind racing through everything he'd learned over the past 6 months. The blockchain technology, the decentralized network, the limited supply of 21 million coins. It all made perfect sense to his programmer's brain. While others saw complexity and risk, he saw elegant mathematics and revolutionary potential. His savings account showed $10,947.32, money he'd been accumulating for 3 years, working overtime at Dataflow Solutions. Money his family expected him to use for a house down payment, a reliable car, or maybe graduate school. Instead, Marcus opened his banking app and began the transfer that would make him either a genius or a cautionary tale. The Thanksgiving dinner 3 weeks later would become legendary in the Thompson family history, though not for the reasons anyone expected. Marcus had planned to keep his investment quiet, but his sister Sarah's constant questions about his finances finally broke his resolve. "I put my savings into Bitcoin," he announced over turkey and stuffing. Watching as conversation ceased and all eyes turned toward him, his father Robert nearly choked on his cranberry sauce. "You put $10,000 into fake internet money?" He sputtered, his weathered mechanic's hands gripping the table. "Son, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard." The laughter started with his Uncle Jim and spread around the table like wildfire. Even his mother Linda shook her head with the expression she reserved for his childhood mishaps. Marcus felt his cheeks burn as family members took turns explaining why he'd made a terrible mistake. "It's not even real money," his cousin Derek chimed in. "You can't hold it, you can't spend it anywhere, and when the government shuts it down, you'll have nothing." His best friend Jake, seated across the table, looked genuinely concerned. "Marcus, you're smarter than this. It's probably some kind of pyramid scheme. You need to sell immediately before you lose everything." The worst part wasn't the mockery. It was the pity in his mother's eyes and the disappointed silence from his father, a man who'd worked with his hands his entire life and couldn't understand his son's faith in invisible algorithms. That night, alone in his childhood bedroom, Marcus opened his laptop and watched Bitcoin's price fluctuate between $95 and $103. The voices of his family echoed in his mind, each doubt they'd expressed finding fertile ground in his own insecurities. Maybe they were right. Maybe he was delusional to think he understood something that Wall Street professionals dismissed as a fad. His finger hovered over the sell button multiple times, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. But then he remembered the white paper he'd read dozens of times, the mathematical certainty of Bitcoin's scarcity, and the growing network of believers who saw the same future he did. With a deep breath, he closed the laptop without selling a single Satoshi. The weeks following Thanksgiving brought a cold shoulder from his family that cut deeper than their laughter. Phone calls became shorter, invitations less frequent, and conversations carefully steered away from anything financial. Marcus threw himself into research, spending every spare moment reading about cryptocurrency, blockchain technology, and monetary theory. His apartment became a fortress of screens and charts, empty coffee cups, and takeout containers, the only evidence of his existence outside the digital realm. When Bitcoin dropped to $85 in December, he didn't tell anyone. When it climbed back to $110, he kept that secret too. He'd learned that some journeys had to be traveled alone, even when the destination promised to change everything. The crash of 2014 hit Marcus like a physical blow. He watched helplessly as Bitcoin plummeted from $800 to $200, wiping out paper profits he'd never actually believed were real. His phone buzzed incessantly with messages from Jake. "Please tell me you sold at the top." Followed by, "Marcus, respond to me." And finally, "I'm coming over." When Jake arrived at his apartment that February evening, he found Marcus staring at red charts on multiple monitors, surrounded by energy drink cans and crumpled notebook pages filled with calculations. "This is it," Jake said, pulling up a chair. "This is your chance to get out before it goes to zero. You can still salvage maybe $6,000. Marcus's response was barely a whisper. "It's not going to zero," but doubt crept into his voice for the first time since he'd made the investment. The family interventions began in earnest after Easter dinner, when Marcus's gaunt appearance and obvious exhaustion sparked concern from his mother. "Honey, you look terrible," Linda said, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "This Bitcoin thing is consuming you. Your father and I are worried." Robert was less diplomatic. "Son, you've been acting like a man possessed. It's time to cut your losses and move on with your life. Sarah found you a nice girl at the hospital where she works. Maybe it's time to focus on real relationships instead of imaginary money." Marcus wanted to explain about the technology, about the future he could see so clearly, but the words felt foreign in his mouth. How could he make them understand that he wasn't just holding an investment, he was holding a piece of the future? Emma Chen entered his life like a breath of fresh air during the brutal bear market of 2015. They met at a coffee shop near his office, where she was sketching designs for a local restaurant's rebrand. Her genuine curiosity about his work, combined with her artistic perspective on technology, made Marcus feel less alone for the first time in months. "So you really believe in this Bitcoin thing?" she asked during their third date, her dark eyes reflecting the candlelight at the small Italian restaurant they'd discovered. "I do," Marcus replied, surprised by how confident he sounded. "I know everyone thinks I'm crazy, including my family, but I can see something they can't." Emma smiled and reached across the table to touch his hand. "Sometimes the best ideas seem crazy at first." Van Gogh sold exactly one painting in his lifetime. For 6 beautiful months, Marcus allowed himself to believe that love might be enough to bridge the gap between his vision and the skeptical world around him. Emma supported him through Bitcoin's continued decline, even encouraging him to write blog posts about cryptocurrency to help process his thoughts. They talked about moving in together, about traveling to conferences where Marcus could meet other believers. But the isolation that had protected Marcus's conviction also created walls that even love couldn't completely breach. He spent entire weekends analyzing market patterns while Emma waited patiently for his attention. When she suggested he sell just half his holdings to fund their relationship goals, Marcus felt the familiar sting of misunderstanding. "You don't get it either," he said quietly, the words hanging between them like a chasm. The breakup came on a rainy Thursday in November 2015, with Bitcoin hovering around $320. "I can't compete with your obsession," Emma said through tears. "I thought I could, but you're more married to those computers than you could ever be to me. I'm watching you disappear into this digital world, and I can't follow you there." Marcus wanted to fight for her, wanted to promise he'd change, but he knew it would be a lie. The numbers on his screen represented more than money. They were validation for a future only he could see clearly. After Emma left, Marcus sat alone in his apartment, listening to the rain against his windows and watching Bitcoin's price tick up and down. His phone showed 17 missed calls from various family members, probably orchestrated by his mother's latest attempt to stage an intervention. The next 2 years blurred together in a haze of price alerts, forum discussions, and growing social isolation. Marcus declined dinner invitations, skipped holiday gatherings, and watched from his digital fortress as Bitcoin slowly, painfully, began to climb. His family's concern evolved into resigned disappointment. His co-workers stopped asking about his weekend plans. The loneliness was profound, but it was also purifying. Without the constant noise of other people's doubts, Marcus could hear the signal clearly. Bitcoin wasn't just recovering, it was preparing for something extraordinary. He held on, not because he was stubborn, but because he could see what others couldn't. The future was arriving exactly on schedule. The year 2017 arrived like a vindication wrapped in chaos. Marcus watched in silent amazement as Bitcoin exploded from $1,000 to $5,000, then to $10,000, and finally to an unbelievable $19,183 by December. His phone, silent for months, suddenly erupted with messages from family and friends who had previously written him off as delusional. "Marcus, please tell me you sold some," Jake texted frantically. "You must be rich now." His sister Sarah called every few days, her voice a mixture of excitement and concern. "The whole family is talking about you. Dad keeps checking the Bitcoin price on his phone. Mom wants to know if you're okay." But Marcus had learned to distrust the euphoria as much as he'd endured the despair. During the peak madness of late 2017, when strangers at coffee shops discussed cryptocurrency and his Uber drivers asked for investment advice, Marcus felt more isolated than ever. The very people who had mocked him now wanted to be part of his success, but their sudden interest felt hollow and opportunistic. His uncle Jim, who had laughed loudest at that infamous Thanksgiving dinner, showed up at his apartment unannounced. "Marcus, I've been thinking," Jim said with an awkward smile. "Maybe you could help me buy some of this Bitcoin. I've got 20,000 sitting in savings, earning nothing." Marcus looked at his uncle's eager face and felt a profound sadness. "It's not that simple, Uncle Jim. This isn't a get-rich-quick scheme. If you don't understand why you're buying it, you'll panic and sell at the worst possible time." The crash of 2018 validated Marcus's caution in ways that brought him no joy. As Bitcoin plummeted from its peak to below $4,000, the same people who had begged for his secrets now blamed him for their losses. His cousin Derek, who had invested his entire bonus check at $17,000, stopped speaking to him entirely. "You could have warned us it was going to crash," Sarah said during one of their increasingly rare phone calls. "You knew it was overvalued." Marcus wanted to explain that he had warned them, that he'd told everyone to only invest what they could afford to lose, that true belief required surviving multiple cycles. Instead, he simply said, "I'm still holding." The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. The isolation deepened throughout 2018 and 2019 as Bitcoin languished in what the media dubbed crypto winter. Marcus's former colleagues at Dataflow Solutions whispered about his Bitcoin obsession whenever he passed in the hallways. He'd been promoted twice based on his programming skills, but his reputation as the crypto guy made him a curiosity rather than a colleague. During team lunches, conversations would halt awkwardly when he approached, as if his presence reminded everyone of their own financial decisions and regrets. Marcus learned to eat alone, finding strange comfort in the solitude that had once tormented him. The numbers on his screen had become his most reliable companions, their brutal honesty a refuge from the shifting opinions of people who claimed to care about him. By 2019, Marcus had perfected the art of existing in plain sight while remaining invisible. He attended family gatherings with practiced politeness, deflecting questions about Bitcoin with shrugs and topic changes. He dated occasionally, but never mentioned his investments until relationships ended for reasons that felt familiar and predetermined. The loneliness had evolved from acute pain into a dull, constant ache that he'd learned to navigate. When Bitcoin began showing signs of life again, climbing steadily from $3,200 to $7,000, Marcus felt no urge to celebrate or share the news. He'd learned that the most profound transformations happened in silence, witnessed only by those brave enough to believe in tomorrow, while everyone else remained trapped in today. His persistence had become a fortress, protecting not just his investment, but his vision of a future that only he seemed capable of seeing clearly. The pandemic of 2020 changed everything for the world, but for Marcus, it only confirmed what he'd known for 7 years. As governments printed trillions of dollars and traditional markets crashed, Bitcoin emerged as digital gold. He watched from his home office, now permanently remote, as institutional investors like Tesla and MicroStrategy began accumulating the asset his family had once called fake money. His portfolio, which had grown to 100 Bitcoin through careful dollar-cost averaging during the dark years, suddenly represented life-changing wealth. When Bitcoin crossed $20,000 again in December 2020, Marcus felt no vindication, only a quiet certainty that this was just the beginning. The meteoric rise to $64,000 in 2021 transformed Marcus from a comfortable millionaire into someone whose wealth exceeded his wildest calculations. His original $10,000 investment, supplemented by years of modest additions, now approached $6.4 million. Yet he told no one, maintaining the same modest lifestyle he'd cultivated during the lean years. He drove the same 2015 Honda Civic, lived in the same apartment, and wore the same simple clothes to his remote job at Dataflow Solutions. The only change was the premium security software protecting his digital wallets and the secure hardware devices hidden in multiple locations around Austin. Family gatherings became exercises in careful performance. During Christmas dinner 2021, as his brother-in-law discussed real estate investments and his father complained about inflation eating his pension, Marcus nodded politely while his phone showed Bitcoin trading at $47,000. "You still holding that Bitcoin?" his Uncle Jim asked with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "A little," Marcus replied, the understatement of the century delivered with practiced nonchalance. Sarah studied his face with the intuition of an older sister. "How much is a little, Marcus?" But he'd learned that some truths were too large for casual conversation. The crash of 2022, from $69,000 to below $16,000, barely registered as turbulence to Marcus anymore. He'd weathered 4 major Bitcoin cycles and understood that volatility was the price of revolutionary change. While newer investors panicked and media proclaimed the death of crypto for the 100th time, Marcus quietly accumulated more Bitcoin with each paycheck. His total holdings grew to 110 Bitcoin as others sold in desperation. The paper loss of millions felt abstract compared to the concrete knowledge that adoption was accelerating globally. Countries were making Bitcoin legal tender, corporations were adding it to their balance sheets, and the infrastructure he'd dreamed about in 2013 was finally materializing. By the end of 2022, as Bitcoin stabilized around $17,000, Marcus had achieved something rarer than wealth. He had achieved peace with his convictions. The loneliness that had once felt like punishment now felt like clarity. The family dinners where he smiled and nodded through conversations about traditional investments while sitting on a fortune they couldn't comprehend no longer stung. They amused him. He'd learned to carry secrets not as burdens, but as privileges. When his co-workers discussed their 401k performance or real estate portfolios, Marcus listened with genuine interest while maintaining his reputation as the quiet, slightly eccentric programmer who'd once lost money on some internet coins. The truth was simpler and more profound. Marcus hadn't just held Bitcoin through multiple cycles. Bitcoin had held him, transforming a lonely programmer into a patient guardian of the future. The call came at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in March 2023. Sarah's voice shattered Marcus's sleep with words that stopped his heart. "Dad collapsed at work. They're saying it's a massive heart attack. You need to get to Austin General immediately." Marcus threw on clothes with trembling hands, his mind racing between paternal mortality and Bitcoin's recent climb to $28,000. At the hospital, he found his family clustered in the cardiac intensive care unit, their faces etched with fear and exhaustion. Robert Thompson, the man who'd mocked his son's digital investments for a decade, lay unconscious, surrounded by machines that beeped with mechanical precision. Dr. Martinez delivered the devastating news with clinical efficiency. Your father needs immediate triple bypass surgery, followed by weeks of specialized cardiac rehabilitation. Without insurance covering the experimental procedure he requires, you're looking at approximately $340,000 in medical expenses. The number hit the family like a physical blow. Linda Thompson began crying quietly, her teacher's pension and Robert's modest mechanic retirement savings nowhere near sufficient. "We'll have to mortgage the house," Sarah whispered, her nurse's training making her acutely aware of the financial reality facing uninsured medical emergencies. Even then, it might not be enough. Marcus stood silently in the hospital corridor, watching his family grapple with impossible mathematics while his phone showed a portfolio worth over $3 million. The irony was sharp enough to cut. The man who'd called Bitcoin fake money now needed exactly the kind of real money that Marcus's fake investment had generated. He could solve this crisis with a simple transfer, converting a tiny fraction of his holdings into the funds that would save his father's life. But 10 years of mockery, isolation, and dismissal couldn't be erased by a medical emergency, no matter how severe. The revelation came accidentally during a hushed family meeting in the hospital cafeteria. Jake, who'd driven down from Dallas upon hearing the news, was researching medical loans on his laptop when he noticed Marcus checking his phone. "Still watching those Bitcoin prices?" Jake asked with weary affection. "What's it worth now, a few thousand?" Marcus's finger hovered over his portfolio app, the numbers glowing like an accusation. "More than that," he said quietly. Sarah's exhausted mind slowly processed the implication. "Marcus, how much more?" The question hung in the fluorescent-lit air like a challenge to 10 years of carefully maintained secrecy. When Marcus finally showed them his portfolio balance, the silence was deafening. $3.2 million in Bitcoin, accumulated through a decade of ridicule, isolation, and unwavering belief. Linda's teacher-trained mind did the math instantly, more than enough to save Robert's life 10 times over. "Jesus, Marcus," Sarah breathed, her voice a mixture of awe and something approaching betrayal. "All this time, while we worried about you, while we thought you were struggling—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Jake stared at the screen in disbelief, remembering years of pleading with Marcus to sell. The family that had laughed at his investment now faced the uncomfortable truth that their mockery had created a millionaire who owed them nothing, yet held their salvation in his digital wallet. Marcus stared at his father's unconscious form through the ICU window, machines breathing for the man who'd once called his investment the stupidest thing he'd ever heard. The weight of 10 years pressed against his chest, every laugh, every dismissal, every moment of isolation. His family stood behind him in the hallway, their earlier shock replaced by desperate hope and unspoken expectation. The power dynamic had shifted completely. The ridiculed son now held his father's life in his digital hands. "I need some air," Marcus said quietly, walking toward the hospital's rooftop garden. On the roof, surrounded by Austin's skyline, Marcus opened his phone and stared at the numbers that represented his vindication. He could walk away. He could let them scramble for loans and mortgages while he watched from the sidelines, finally free from their judgment. The thought felt hollow, like winning a game nobody else remembered playing. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Your father always loved you, even when he didn't understand you. Please come back." The simple message shattered the wall he'd built around his heart. Robert Thompson wasn't perfect, but he'd worked 16-hour days to provide for his family, teaching Marcus the value of persistence through action rather than words. Marcus returned to find his family huddled together, their faces etched with the kind of desperation that strips away pretense. "I'll cover everything," he announced, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "Dad's surgery, the rehabilitation, everything he needs." The relief was immediate and overwhelming. Linda collapsed into a chair, tears streaming down her face. Sarah grabbed his arm with trembling hands. "Marcus, we can't possibly repay—" He cut her off gently. "You don't need to repay anything. He's my father too." "Jake, Ever the accountant started to speak about payment plans and interest, but Marcus shook his head. No contracts, no loans, just family. The surgery lasted 8 hours. Marcus sat with his family in the waiting room, no longer the isolated outsider, but the quiet guardian who'd been watching over them all along. When Dr. Martinez emerged with news of the successful operation, the celebration was bittersweet. Robert would recover fully, but the family dynamics had shifted permanently. As his father slowly awakened over the following days, Marcus was there, explaining gently how a decade of patience had made this moment possible. "I never stopped believing," Marcus said, holding his father's weathered hand. "Not in Bitcoin, and not in us." 3 months later, at the first family gathering since the crisis, Robert raised his glass with a surgeon-repaired heart beating strong. "To my son Marcus," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "who saw the future when the rest of us were stuck in the past, and who chose love over pride when it mattered most." The laughter around the table was different now, warmer, more genuine, earned through shared crisis and unexpected grace. Marcus's phone buzzed with a Bitcoin price alert, but for the first time in 10 years, he didn't check it immediately. Some moments were worth more than any amount of digital gold, and this was one of them.